Hello, my name is Bob, and today we'll be talking about migration. In Key Issue 1, there are two main points that we'll be discussing, which is distance of migration and U.S. immigration patterns. But before we dive into these main points, let's first understand what migration is. So what is migration? Well, migration is a permanent move to a new location. It's a form of mobility which varies in many ways. Most people migrate in search of three objectives: economic opportunity, cultural freedom, and environmental comfort. This chapter will later on explain the reasons why people migrate. In the late 19th century, an outline of migration laws were written by geographer E.G. Revenstein. Revenstein's laws can be organized into three groups: the distance that migrants typically move, the reasons migrants move, and the characteristics of migrants. In Key Issue 1, we are specifically focusing on Revenstein's laws for distance. The first law is that most migrants relocate at a short distance and remain within the same country. The second law is that long-distance migrants move to other countries for major centers of economic activity. Migration can be divided into two types: international migration and internal migration. So what is international and internal migration? Well, let's begin with international migration. International migration is a permanent move from one country to another. It can be further divided into two types. The first type is voluntary migration, which is when the migrant chose to move. For example, here in the picture, this migrant is choosing to move to the US for economic opportunities. The second type is forced migration, which is when the migrant has been compelled to move. Examples of this would be political and environmental factors such as war and floods. Next is internal migration. Internal migration is a permanent move within the same country. It can also be divided into two types: interregional migration, which is a movement from one region of a country to another. As you can see in the drawing, this migrant is moving from one region of Mexico to another. The second type is intra-regional migration, which is movement within one region. So if a migrant were to live in a suburban area, it would move to the city and vice versa. Moving on, we have reached international migration patterns. About 9% of the world's people are international migrants. On a global scale, the three largest flows of migrants are from Asia to Europe, from Asia to North America, and from Latin America to North America. The global pattern reflects the importance of migration from developing countries and developed countries. Second main point is U.S. immigration patterns. The U.S. has had three main eras of immigration: colonial settlement in the 17th and 18th centuries, mass European immigration in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and Asia and Latin America immigration in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. First part is U.S. immigration, 17th and 18th centuries. Immigration to the colonies in the newly dependent U.S. came from two main regions: Europe. 2 million Europeans migrated to the U.S. They also established colonies such as Jamestown and Plymouth. About 90% were British migrants. Also sub-Saharan Africa. Most Africans were slaves. 40,000 were shipped. It was illegal in 1808, but 250,000 slaves were still brought into the U.S. Next part is U.S. immigration mid-19th to early 20th century. The U.S. in the 19th century offered economic opportunities for Europeans, which caused an increase of 32 million migrants to the U.S. Ireland and Germany, 1840s and 1850s. Immigration jumped from 20,000 to 200,000 in the U.S. 3/4 of U.S. immigrants came from Ireland and Germany. Economic and political factors affected the immigration pattern. In the 1870s, Ireland and Germany immigration declined during the Civil War, which was in 1861 through 65. 1880s Scandinavia. About 500,000 migrants immigrated to the U.S. per year. Swedes and Norwegians also joined the U.S. The Industrial Revolution also was a cause of diffusion to Scandinavia. 1905 through 1914, Southern and Eastern Europe reached 1 million in immigration. Most migrants came from Italy, Russia, and Austria-Hungary. Industrial Revolution coincided with the diffusion of migrants. Last part is U.S. immigration, late 20th century to the early 21st century. Due to the Great Depression and World War II, immigration decreased between 1930s and 1940s, but starting the 21st century, it increased to high levels. Recent immigrants have migrated from two regions, Asia. Leading U.S. immigrants are China, India, Vietnam, and the Philippines. Next is Latin America. 1/2 million immigrate annually, twice as many during this entire 19th century. Although the pattern of immigration has changed from European to Asian and Latin American, the reasons for immigration remain the same.
Hi, my name's Henry, and today I'm here to discuss key issue 2. Where do people migrate within a country? There are two main types of internal migration, interregional migration and interregional migration. What is interregional migration? It's when someone migrates between regions of a country. Nowadays, people migrate from rural areas to urban areas, but in the past, people migrated for more farmland. The opening of the American West is a good example of large-scale internal migration. When the U.S. first got its independence, there were already long-established settlements along the Atlantic coast and newer settlements west of the Appalachian Mountains. As mass interregional migration occurred, the interior of the U.S. was developed. The population center is the average location of everyone in the country, also known as the center of population gravity. The center has constantly shifted westward, however the rate of movement has varied in different eras. 1790, hugging the coast. Few colonists ventured from coastal settlements due to the dependence on shipping links with Europe for products and exports of raw materials. The mountains also blocked expansion as well as the indigenous residents, known as Indians. 1800 to 1840, crossing the Appalachians. As transportation methods improved, the colonists were able to start crossing the mountains for large amounts of land for low prices, and they also started cutting down trees for farms and buildings. 1850 to 1890, rushing to the gold. People would quickly migrate to California for gold and pass over the Great Plains because of the lack of trees, dry climate, and tough sod. 1900 to 1940, filling the Great Plains. When agricultural technology advanced, people started to move to the Great Plains and farmers would use barbed wire fences instead of wood ones, steel plows to cut the sod, and windmills as well as well drilling equipment to pump more water. Also, the expansion of railroads encouraged settlements of the Great Plains. 1950 to 2010, moving south. People started going south for the job opportunities and warm weather. Some people in the Northeast and Midwest believe that the southern states have stolen industries from them, even though those industries moved or are completely new. Now in the 21st century, net migration between each pair of regions is close to zero. Now, to move on to interregional migration.
Intra-regional migration is the permanent movement within one region of the country. It was in the 1800s when people started to migrate from rural to urban areas. It all started in Europe and North America as it was a part to the Industrial Revolution. The percentage of people living in the urban areas increased in the U.S. In 1800, it increased 5%. Then from there was a 50% increase in the 1920s, and in 2010 there was an 80% increase. The developing countries that were diffusing in urbanization were Asia, Latin America, and Africa. Then there was an increasing percentage of living in the urban areas, which was through 1920 to 2010. Asia was 15% to 45%, Latin America was 40% to 80%, and Sub-Saharan Africa was 10% to 40%. There is about 20 million people who live in the rural areas and migrate each year to live in the urban areas. Most people that live in a developing country are willing to move from the cities to the suburbs. In the 20th century, most cities in developed countries were declining population as suburb areas were increasing in population. Americans were migrating from cities to suburbs each year, and these patterns were also comparable to Europe and Canada. People were making the choices to live in the suburban area because of the lifestyle they can have. They won't have to be living in an apartment where it's crowded, but have their own house and yard where their kids can play safely. Counter-urbanization is when people are moving from urban areas to the rural areas. More people are willing to move to the rural areas than moving out of them. They are willing to change their lifestyle. For example, they're able to have their own farm, which means they're allowed to own their own horses and grow vegetables. For the ones that live in this area, they do not earn their living from agriculture, but work in factories in their area or in a small town shops. Counter-urbanization will mostly be found in the Rocky Mountains in the U.S., and rural counties in states will be Colorado, Idaho, Utah, and Wyoming. As also technology helps a lot because it allows you to work anywhere and be able to buy your necessities online and get it shipped to your house in a couple of days. Push and pull factors will play a role for people deciding if they want to migrate. A push factor is when people move out of their present location, and a pull factor is when people move into a new location. There are three major types of push and pull factors. There are economic, political, and environmental. The Ravenstein Law sums up why people migrate. People mostly migrate for economic reasons, while others will migrate for political or environmental reasons, but it isn't more frequently than economic factors. Slavery was a political factor because millions were being shipped to other countries as slaves or even prisoners during the 18th and early 19th century. Now migration is happening because of political conflict. As the UNHCR recognizes three groups, which are refugee, internally displaced person, and asylum seeker. A refugee is when they are forced to migrate to escape from war, persecution, or natural disaster. Internally displaced person has been forced to migrate for political reasons too, but this doesn't involve migrating across an international border. And finally, asylum seeker, which is migrating to another country and hoping to be acknowledged as a refugee. The United Nations have found that there are 10.6 million refugees, 14.7 million IDPs, and 838,000 asylum seekers in 2010. They will migrate away from hazardous areas but will get pulled into areas that have attractive regions. To get pulled to attractive environments, they need to have mountains, a seaside, and warm climates. The southern coast of England and the Mediterranean coast of France and Florida tend to have the people that retire and migrate to these warm climates. Areas that have warm climates like southern Spain and southwestern United States get attracted with more migrants. Migrants start to leave when they're starting to notice environmental factors like floodplain, which is when the areas of low-lying ground is adjacent to a river.
People migrate for two reasons, which is pull and push factors. Pull factors induces people to move into a new location, such as job opportunities and good education. Push factors induces people to move out of their present location because they don't have enough money or because of poverty. Many European immigrants move to North America because they hope to make money over there because of the new jobs they could find. This pull factor is what lured people from Latin America and Asia to the United States and Canada. There are two different groups that you could find migrating over to a new location. One of them is refugees, and the other are new employees. It is very important to tell the difference between the two groups because they are treated very differently. The two groups are treated differently in the United States, Canada, and European countries. There are 16 countries with the highest per capita income, and 14 are in Northern and Western Europe. These people are willing to accept any job that others wouldn't want to accept. Due to their new jobs, these immigrants are able to send money to their families. Germany and other wealthy European countries operated a guest worker program in the 1960s and the 1970s. A guest worker is a term used for a worker who migrated to developed countries and are in search of a higher paying job. Immigrants from poor countries were allowed to immigrate temporarily to obtain jobs. The program was only intended to be temporarily, and guest workers needed to go home after a few years. The term guest worker is no longer used in Europe, and the government programs no longer exist. Asia is both a major source and major destination for migrants in search of work such as in China and Southwest Asia. Visas were granted for two major reasons, which is specific employment placement and family reunification. Quotas are maximum limits on the number of people who could immigrate to the United States during a one-year period and do not apply to refugees. Europe contributes to brain drain, and it is a large-scale immigration by talented people such as doctors and scientists. Many well-educated Asians entered the United States under the preference for skilled workers. Once they are admitted, they can bring in relatives under the family reunification provisions of the quota, and they must go through a process of chain migration if they want to bring in a wider range of other relatives from Asia. Chain migration is the migration of people to a specific location because relatives or members of the same nationality previously migrated there. Many who cannot legally enter the United States immigrate illegally. Those who do so are entering without proper documents and more are called unauthorized immigrants. The Pew Hispanic Center estimated that there were 11.2 million unauthorized immigrants living in the United States in 2010. The number increased rapidly during the first years of the 21st century. After hitting a peak in 2007, the figure declined because the severe recession that started in 2008 reduced job opportunities in the United States. This is a graph to show the number of unauthorized immigrants to the United States, and they're all from Mexico and other countries, and shows a total. A barrier has been constructed covering approximately 1/4 of the border. Several large urban areas are situated on the border, including San Diego, California, and Tijuana, Mexico at the western end. Along its northern border with the United States, Mexico is the source for any unauthorized immigrants. Immigrants from other Latin American countries, especially El Salvador, travel through Guatemala without the need of a passport in order to cross through Mexico. Mexican government estimates that 2 million people a year do cross the border from Guatemala into Mexico, and a passport is needed. Since they do not have a passport, they do this illegally. Most migrate illegally for higher paying jobs in the tropical fruit plantations, and the ultimate destination is the United States.
Immigrants. Some people may think immigrants are important to their countries, but others disagree. Usually, most migrants are male or adults who doesn't have families with children. Most migrants are males because they are most likely to be employed, but the number of migrant women increased by 1990s. Currently, Mexicans are the largest U.S. migrants, and by 1990s, the women's number increased. This changed this Mexican society because they migrated to work and not to be forced in marriage. In the United States, 40% of immigrants are young adults, 5% are elderly people, 16% are children under 15 years old, and immigrants attend school fewer years than U.S. citizens. However, there are people who migrate to the U.S. unauthorized. The U.S. created immigration laws. For example, there are border patrols that prevent immigrants to migrate illegally. Many unauthorized immigrants take jobs most people would not probably take. It is possible for law enforcement officials to verify the legal status of anyone they suspect is unauthorized. In states near the border, they created laws for migrants. In Arizona, migrants are required to carry documents to indicate they are not unauthorized. In addition, in the state of Alabama, illegal migrants are not allowed to attend school or colleges. In Europe, however, Europeans have more rights than non-Europeans. In the 1985 Schengen Treaty, it allows each citizen the right to live permanently, own a property, and have a job. The largest flow of migration in Europe during the 20th century is from south to north. Migration became easier to Europeans than non-Europeans. Most of European countries are in stage 4 demographic transition, which means immigration is not really needed. People against immigrants blame them for crime, unemployment, and high welfare costs. Some believe that culture or tradition are threatened by immigrants because of their culture. Europe was the source of the most immigrants in the world in the 19th century. Most people in Europe are Christians. As they migrate, their art, music, literature, and philosophy spread throughout the world.